Mary Elizabeth Abernathy clutched the letter to her chest as the stagecoach rumbled into Timber Creek, Colorado, her heart pounding with equal parts hope and terror. For everything she owned in this world fit into one threadbare carpetbag, everything except her dreams of a better life in this wild frontier town. The year was 1875, and America's western territories were still rough around the edges, booming with promise yet fraught with danger. Mary had left behind the crowded tenements of Boston after answering an advertisement in the newspaper. Seeking virtuous woman of good character and modest expectations for marriage to established rancher in Colorado Territory. Passage paid upon acceptance. At 22, Mary had few prospects back east. Her parents had died of influenza 3 winters prior, leaving her to fend for herself with only an 8th-grade education and the sewing skills her mother had taught her. When the factory where she worked as a seamstress burned to the ground, taking her meager livelihood with it, the mail-order bride advertisement had seemed like divine providence. The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the Timber Creek Hotel, a 2-story wooden structure with a wide front porch. Mary peered through the dusty window at the bustling Main Street. Men in wide-brimmed hats and women in practical frontier dresses moved purposefully along the wooden boardwalks. This would be her home now, this strange, untamed place, thousands of miles from everything familiar. Timber Creek. Everybody out, the driver called, jumping down to open the door. Mary was the last to descend, carefully minding her skirts on the metal step. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel perspiration forming beneath her high collar. Her intended, a man named Harold Blackwood, had promised to meet her at the hotel. "You must be Miss Abernathy," said a portly gentleman in a tailored suit as he approached. "I'm Elmer Porter, Mr. Blackwood's associate. I'm afraid Harold was called away on urgent business to Denver. He asked me to get you settled at the hotel until his return next week." Mary's heart sank. After traveling for nearly 2 weeks, she had expected hope to meet her future husband immediately. "I see," she said softly. "That is unfortunate timing." Mr. Porter gestured toward the hotel. "Mrs. Wilson runs a respectable establishment. You'll be comfortable there until Harold returns." As they walked toward the hotel, Mary felt eyes upon her. 2 fashionably dressed women stood on the boardwalk, whispering behind gloved hands as they stared openly at her simple dress and worn shoes. "Another mail-order bride," one said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Poor Harold. She looks like she just stepped off a farm." The other woman laughed. "Well, what did he expect ordering a wife from a catalog? Look at her clothes, absolutely provincial." Mary's cheeks burned, but she held her head high as she followed Mr. Porter into the hotel. She was accustomed to cruel remarks. In Boston, the factory girls had often mocked her simple ways and lack of social graces. Her mother had always told her that kindness and hard work were worth more than fancy manners, but in that moment, Mary wished she possessed a bit more sophistication. Mrs. Wilson, the hotel proprietress, was a no-nonsense woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun. She showed Mary to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. "Supper's at 6, she said briskly. "Breakfast at 7. You're welcome to use the parlor downstairs if you'd like to read or so." "Thank you, madam," Mary replied, setting her carpetbag on the bed. "I appreciate your hospitality." After Mrs. Wilson departed, Mary sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed her shoulders to slump. The exhaustion of travel, combined with the disappointment of not meeting Mr. Blackwood and the humiliation of those women's remarks, overwhelmed her. Tears slipped down her cheeks as doubts assailed her. Had she made a terrible mistake coming here? She removed the letter from her pocket, the last one Harold Blackwood had sent before she departed Boston. His handwriting was neat and precise, his words formal but kind. He described his ranch, 10 miles outside of town, with its sturdy house and profitable cattle operation. He'd mentioned wanting a practical wife who could help manage the household. He hadn't mentioned anything about society ladies or their expectations. After washing her face and changing into her second-best dress, Mary ventured downstairs for supper. The dining room was half full, mostly with traveling businessmen who paid her little attention. She ate quietly, keeping her eyes on her plate, until a shadow fell across the table. "Mind if I join you, miss?" asked a deep voice with a slight drawl. Mary looked up to see a tall man in a worn leather vest and simple cotton shirt. His face was tanned from the sun, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes. A cowboy, by the look of him, though he'd removed his hat, revealing dark hair with a slight wave to it. I suppose not," she stammered, unsure of the protocol in this new place. "Much obliged." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Name's Vincent Caldwell. Most folks call me Vince." "Mary Abernathy," she replied, offering her hand as her mother had taught her was proper. Instead of shaking it as she expected, he took it gently and gave a slight bow of his head. "A pleasure, Miss Abernathy." When Mrs. Wilson approached, Vince ordered coffee and a slice of apple pie. "Just finished a cattle drive," he explained to Mary. "Been eating trail dust and beans for 2 weeks. Mrs. Wilson's pie is worth riding 20 miles for." His easy manner helped Mary relax. "Are you from Timber Creek, Mr. Caldwell?" "Born and raised. My father's place is about 15 miles northwest of town. I work as foreman there now." He studied her for a moment. "You're new to these parts." It wasn't a question, but Mary nodded anyway. "I arrived today from Boston." "Boston?" His eyebrows rose. "That's quite a journey. Family business?" Mary hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I'm to be married to Mr. Harold Blackwood." Something flickered in Vince's eyes, but his expression remained friendly. "Blackwood, eh? His ranch borders my father's property to the south." "Then perhaps we'll be neighbors," Mary said, attempting a smile. Vince took a sip of his coffee. "Perhaps so." He paused. "Blackwood's not in town." "No. His associate, Mr. Porter, met me instead. Mr. Blackwood is in Denver on business." Vince frowned slightly. "That's a shame. Long journey to make only to find your intended absent." Before Mary could respond, the hotel doors swung open, and the 2 women who had mocked her earlier entered the dining room, accompanied by several well-dressed men. They spotted Mary immediately, and their expressions turned disdainful. "There she is," one whispered loudly. "Harold's mail-order bride." Can you imagine? Mary's cheeks burned as she stared down at her plate. She wished she could disappear through the floor. "Ladies," Vince called out, his voice carrying across the room. "If you've got something to say, perhaps you'd care to come over and introduce yourselves properly." The women looked startled, then embarrassed as the entire dining room turned to stare at them. After a moment's hesitation, they hurried to a table in the far corner. "Don't mind the Prescott sisters," Vince said, turning back to Mary. "They think having a father who struck silver gives them the right to look down on everyone else." "Thank you," Mary whispered, "but you didn't need to defend me." Vince's expression softened. "Where I come from, we don't let folks get trampled, especially not newcomers who haven't found their footing yet." Mary met his gaze, surprised by the kindness she saw there. "That's very gallant of you, Mr. Caldwell." "Not gallantry, Miss Abernathy, just common decency." He finished his coffee and rose to his feet. "I should be heading back to the ranch. My father will be wondering where I've gotten to." He reached for his hat. "If you need anything while Blackwood's away, you can send word to the Circle C Ranch. That's us, the Caldwells." "Thank you again," Mary said. "It was nice to meet a friendly face." Vince settled his hat on his head. "Welcome to Colorado, Miss Abernathy. I hope you find what you're looking for here." As he walked away, Mary couldn't help but notice how different he was from the other men in the room, less polished, perhaps, but with a genuine warmth that made her feel, for the first time since arriving, that perhaps she hadn't made a mistake after all. The next morning, Mary awoke early, determined to explore the town and perhaps purchase some fabric to make herself a new dress. Her funds were limited, but she wanted to present her best appearance when Harold Blackwood returned. Timber Creek's Main Street boasted a general store, a bank, a small church, 2 saloons, and various other businesses. As Mary made her way to the general store, she noticed people watching her with undisguised curiosity. Word had clearly spread about the mail-order bride from Boston. Inside the store, a bell tinkled as she entered. The shopkeeper, a balding man with spectacles, nodded politely. "Good morning, miss. Can I help you find something? I'm looking for fabric, please. Something suitable for a day dress." As the shopkeeper showed her the available bolts of cloth, the bell rang again and 3 women entered. They were well dressed, though not as fashionable as the Prescott sisters. "You must be Miss Abernathy," said the oldest of the 3, a plump woman with kind eyes. "I'm Martha Jenkins, the minister's wife. These are my friends, Sarah Cooper and Beatrice Lawson." "Pleased to meet you," Mary said, surprised by the friendly greeting. "We heard you're staying at the hotel until Mr. Blackwood returns," Martha continued. "We thought you might like to join our sewing circle this afternoon. We meet at the church at 2 o'clock. Mary hesitated. Was this a genuine invitation, or would she face more mockery? Sarah, a younger woman with auburn hair, seemed to sense her uncertainty. "We'd truly love to have you. It can be lonely being new in town." "That's very kind," Mary said finally. "I would like that." After the women departed, Mary selected a bolt of blue cotton, simple but of good quality. As the shopkeeper measured and cut the fabric, she heard a familiar voice. "Morning, George. I need some supplies for the ranch." Mary turned to see Vince Caldwell entering the store. He spotted her and tipped his hat. "Miss Abernathy, good to see you again." "Mr. Caldwell," she acknowledged with a smile. "I didn't expect to run into you so soon." "Ranch business brings me to town at least once a week," he explained, then noticed her purchase. "New dress," Mary nodded. "I thought I should have something nicer." She didn't add that she was trying to avoid further ridicule. Vince frowned slightly, as if reading her thoughts. "There's nothing wrong with what you're wearing now. You're kind to say so, but I know my clothes are rather plain." "Plain isn't a fault, Miss Abernathy, not out here where practical matters more than fashionable." He glanced around the store, then lowered his voice. "Don't let folks like the Prescott sisters make you think you need to change who you are." Before Mary could respond, the shopkeeper returned with her wrapped package and change. Vince tipped his hat again. "Enjoy your day, Miss Abernathy." As Mary left the store, she pondered Vince's words. In Boston, she had always felt inadequate, not pretty enough, not clever enough, not sophisticated enough. She had hoped for a fresh start in Colorado, but it seemed the same standards applied here. Yet Vince Caldwell, with his straightforward manner and kind eyes, seemed to see value in her simplicity. The sewing circle turned out to be a pleasant surprise. The women welcomed Mary warmly, asking about her journey and her life in Boston. When she mentioned that she had worked as a seamstress, they immediately showed interest in her skills. "Harold Blackwood is fortunate to get a bride with practical abilities," Martha Jenkins said, as she watched Mary's nimble fingers working on a quilt square. "Too many young women these days think household skills beneath them." "I've heard he's quite successful," Sarah added. "His ranch is one of the largest in the county." "What made you decide to become a mail-order bride, dear?" asked Beatrice, an older woman with silver hair. "If you don't mind my asking." Mary hesitated, but these women had been kind to her. "I lost my parents 3 years ago. When the factory where I worked burned down, I had few options left. Mr. Blackwood's advertisement seemed like providence." "It takes courage to travel so far to marry a stranger," Martha said softly. "I admire that." "Have you met Harold yet?" Sarah inquired. "No, he's in Denver on business. I'm to stay at the hotel until he returns." The women exchanged glances. "Well, he's a respectable man," Martha said finally. "A bit. Particular in his ways, but well regarded in the community." "What do you mean by particular?" Mary asked, sensing there was something they weren't saying. "Harold likes things just so," Beatrice explained diplomatically. He's built his ranch through hard work and attention to detail. Mary nodded, though she felt a flicker of unease. She hadn't expected a rough frontiersman, but she hoped her future husband wasn't too rigid. She'd had enough of strict rules in the Boston factories. As the afternoon progressed, the conversation turned to other topics: local gossip, church matters, and plans for the upcoming Harvest Festival. Mary began to feel more at ease, especially when the women invited her to join them again the following week. "And you must come to church on Sunday," Martha insisted. "I'll save you a seat with us." Walking back to the hotel, Mary felt more hopeful than she had since arriving. The sewing circle ladies had been welcoming, and even if the Prescott sisters looked down on her, perhaps she could find a place here after all. Her newfound optimism faltered that evening, however, when Elmer Porter stopped by the hotel to check on her. "I've had a telegram from Harold," he announced. "His business in Denver is taking longer than expected. He won't return for at least another 2 weeks." Mary's disappointment must have shown on her face, for Porter added hastily, "He did authorize me to advance you some funds for any necessities you might need." "That's thoughtful of him," Mary replied, though she couldn't help feeling abandoned before she'd even met her intended husband. "Harold is a methodical man," Porter explained. "He doesn't rush important decisions, and this Denver business concerns a significant investment." After Porter left, Mary sat by the window of her room, watching as the lamplighter moved down the street, bringing pockets of warm glow to the gathering dusk. 2 weeks more of waiting. 2 weeks of curious stares and whispers. 2 weeks of wondering if she'd made the right choice. A movement across the street caught her attention. Vince Caldwell was emerging from the telegraph office, his tall figure unmistakable even in the dim light. He paused on the boardwalk, reading what appeared to be a telegram, his expression serious. Then he glanced up, his gaze sweeping across the hotel windows. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Vince touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. Mary nodded in return, feeling an unexpected flutter in her chest at this small connection. As Vince mounted his horse and rode away, Mary wondered about him. There was something so steady, so genuine about the cowboy that contrasted sharply with what she'd heard of Harold Blackwood. She pushed the thought away immediately. It was ungrateful disloyal, even to compare her intended husband to another man before she'd even met him. Still, as she prepared for bed, Mary couldn't help but remember Vince's words. "Don't let folks make you think you need to change who you are." Simple advice, perhaps, but it resonated deeply with a young woman who had spent most of her life feeling inadequate. The next morning brought unexpected excitement to Timber Creek. A cattle buyer had arrived from Chicago, and the saloons were doing brisk business as ranchers gathered to discuss prices and contracts. Mary was returning from the mercantile when she encountered a commotion outside the Silver Dollar Saloon. A crowd had gathered around 2 men facing off in the dusty street. One was a heavyset man in an expensive suit, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. The other was Vince Caldwell, his stance relaxed but alert. "You Caldwells think you own this county," the suited man was saying loudly. "But your scrubby little ranch isn't worth half what my father paid for his, and neither are your cattle." "Your father's welcome to his opinion, Preston," Vince replied evenly, "but spreading lies about our stock to the Chicago buyer crosses a line." Preston Prescott, Mary realized he must be related to the sisters who had mocked her, took a step closer, swaying slightly. "I only told him the truth. Caldwell cattle are sickly. Everyone knows it." Vince's expression hardened. "That's a lie, and you know it." "Our herd is the healthiest in the territory." "Prove it," Preston sneered, his hand hovering near the pistol at his hip. A tense silence fell over the crowd. Mary held her breath, certain she was about to witness bloodshed, but Vince surprised her. "I don't need to prove anything to a man too drunk to stand straight," he said calmly. "Go home and sober up, Preston. We can settle this like businessmen tomorrow." Preston's face darkened with fury. "You calling me a coward, Caldwell? I'm calling you drunk." Vince replied. And I'm not drawing on an unarmed man. It took Mary a moment to realize what he meant. Preston's holster was empty. He must have checked his weapon at the bar, as was customary in many Western towns. Preston seemed to deflate slightly, then rallied. This isn't over, Caldwell. My father will hear about this. I'm sure he will, Vince said dryly. As the crowd began to disperse, Vince spotted Mary standing on the boardwalk, clutching her package from the mercantile. He approached, his expression softening. Sorry you had to see that, Miss Abernathy. Not the best introduction to Timber Creek hospitality. Are you all right? She asked, concerned. Right as rain. Preston Prescott makes more noise than a brass band, but there's not much behind it. He gestured to her package. Been shopping again? Just some thread and needles. The sewing circle ladies invited me to join them yesterday. Vince smiled. Martha Jenkins and her friends, they're good women, salt of the earth. They began walking together toward the hotel, Vince shortening his stride to match hers. I heard Blackwood's been delayed in Denver, he said after a moment. Mary nodded. Another 2 weeks, at least. That's a long time to be stranded in a strange town. I'm not stranded, Mary protested. Everyone has been very kind. Well, almost everyone, she amended, thinking of the Prescott sisters. Vince chuckled. The Prescotts are the exception, not the rule. Most folks around here are decent enough. He hesitated, then added, My sister's having a birthday gathering at our ranch this Saturday. Just family and a few close friends. You'd be welcome to join us if you'd like to see more of the country than just Timber Creek. Mary was touched by the invitation but hesitated. That's very kind, but I'm not sure if it would be proper. Martha and her husband will be there, Vince added. And my father, of course. It's a family affair, nothing improper about it. After a moment's consideration, Mary smiled. Then I would be delighted to accept, thank you. I'll come by for you around noon on Saturday, Vince said as they reached the hotel. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. As he tipped his hat and departed, Mary felt a warm glow of anticipation. A birthday gathering at her real ranch would be a welcome diversion during her extended wait for Harold Blackwood's return. And if she was honest with herself, she was looking forward to spending more time in Vince Caldwell's company. His straightforward manner and quiet confidence were a refreshing change from the artifice she'd known in Boston. Saturday dawned clear and bright, with the crisp edge of autumn in the air. Mary had spent the previous evening altering her new blue dress, adding some simple embroidery to the collar and cuffs. It wasn't fashionable by Eastern standards, but it was neat and becoming. At precisely noon, Vince arrived at the hotel driving a small buggy. He had traded his usual working clothes for a clean shirt and vest, though he still wore his familiar hat and boots. Miss Abernathy, he greeted her with a warm smile. You look lovely. Thank you, Mary replied, smoothing her skirts nervously. I hope I'm dressed appropriately for a ranch gathering. You're perfect just as you are, Vince assured her, helping her into the buggy. As they drove out of town, the landscape opened up before them, rolling hills covered in golden grass, with mountains rising blue and majestic in the distance. Cattle grazed in the meadows, and occasionally they passed small homesteads with smoke rising from chimneys. It's beautiful, Mary breathed, taking in the vast openness of it all. Different from Boston, I imagine, Vince commented. Completely. In Boston, you can hardly see the sky for all the buildings and smoke. Here, it's like the sky goes on forever. Vince nodded. That's why I could never live in a city. I need space to breathe. Tell me about your family, Mary said, eager to know more about him. My father, Thomas Caldwell, came west in '49 during the gold rush. Didn't find gold, but found something better, good grazing land. Started with just a few head of cattle and built it up over the years. Pride was evident in Vince's voice. My mother passed on when I was 15. It's just my father, my sister Madeline, we call her Maddie and me now. And you're the foreman? Have been for the past 5 years. Father's getting older, though he'd never admit it. His back troubles him in the winter, so I've been taking on more responsibility. He glanced at her. "What about your family? You mentioned you lost your parents." "Yes, to influenza 3 years ago. We were never wealthy, but we had enough. My father was a carpenter, my mother a seamstress. They taught me the value of hard work and honesty." Mary paused, then added softly, "I miss them every day." "I understand," Vince said. "I still miss my mother, especially at times like today, family gatherings." They drove in companionable silence for a while until Vince pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. "That's the Circle C." As they drew closer, Mary could make out a substantial ranch house built of logs and stone, several barns and outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and bunkhouses for the ranch hands. It wasn't as grand as some eastern estates, but it had a solid, permanent feel to it, the result of years of hard work and care. A young woman with Vince's dark hair came running out to meet them as they pulled up to the house. "Vince, you're late, and Father's been pacing the floor for an hour." "Maddie, meet Miss Mary Abernathy," Vince said as he helped Mary down from the buggy. "Miss Abernathy, my sister Madeline." Maddie, who appeared to be about 18, grinned broadly. "So you're the mysterious guest Vince has been talking about. Welcome to the Circle C, Miss Abernathy." "Please call me Mary," she replied, warming to the girl's enthusiastic greeting. Inside the ranch house, Mary was introduced to Thomas Caldwell, a tall man with weathered features and the same kind eyes as his son. Despite his apparent gruffness, he welcomed Mary warmly. "Any friend of Vince's is welcome at our table," he declared, "even if she is planning to marry Harold Blackwood." There was something in his tone when he mentioned Blackwood that caught Mary's attention. But before she could ponder it, more guests arrived: Martha and Reverend Jenkins, the Coopers, and several neighboring ranchers with their families. The celebration was unlike any party Mary had attended in Boston. There was no formality, no strict adherence to social rules. People sat where they pleased, helped themselves to food laid out on long tables, and moved freely between the house and the yard where games had been set up for the younger children. Maddie, the birthday girl, seemed delighted with the simple gifts. She received a new book from the Reverend and Mrs. Jenkins, a hand-knitted shawl from Mrs. Cooper, and a beautiful silver hairbrush from her father and brother. "It's real silver," she told Mary excitedly. "Vince had it ordered all the way from Denver." Throughout the afternoon, Mary found herself repeatedly in Vince's company. He introduced her to everyone, made sure she always had something to eat or drink, and even persuaded her to join in a game of horseshoes, laughing good-naturedly when her throw went wildly off course. "I'm afraid I've never played before," she apologized. "Neither had I until I was about 6 years old," Vince teased. "You'll get the hang of it." As the sun began to set, someone brought out a fiddle, and an impromptu dance began on the packed earth of the yard. Mary watched from the porch, clapping in time to the music as couples twirled and stomped. "Would you care to dance, Miss Abernathy?" Vince asked, appearing at her side. Mary hesitated. "I don't know these dances. It's not so different from your Eastern dances, I expect, just a bit livelier." He held out his hand. "I promise not to let you fall." Against her better judgment, Mary placed her hand in his. Vince led her to the edge of the dancing area and showed her the basic steps of the country reel. She stumbled at first, but his strong hands kept her steady, and soon she was laughing as they circled and turned with the other dancers. "You're a natural," Vince said as the music ended, and they stood breathless among the other couples. Before Mary could respond, she noticed several people looking past her with expressions of surprise. She turned to see what had caught their attention. A tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit stood at the edge of the yard, watching the festivities with a look of cool appraisal. He appeared to be in his late 30s, with perfectly groomed dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "Harold," Thomas Caldwell said, stepping forward. "This is unexpected." Mary's heart leaped into her throat. Harold Blackwood, her intended husband, had returned from Denver early, and here she was, dancing with another man at a party she hadn't told him about. I concluded my business sooner than anticipated, Blackwood replied, his voice cultured and precise. When I arrived in Timber Creek this afternoon, Mrs. Wilson informed me that my fiancé had gone to the Circle C ranch. His gaze settled on Mary. I presume you are Miss Abernathy. Mary felt herself flush as she stepped away from Vince. Yes, Mr. Blackwood, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Harold Blackwood approached and took her hand, bowing slightly over it in a formal gesture. The pleasure is mine, Miss Abernathy. I apologize for not being present when you arrived. It's quite all right, Mary said, though she couldn't help noticing that he didn't apologize for his extended absence, only for not being there on the day of her arrival. I see you've met the Caldwells, Blackwood continued, glancing at Vince with a cool expression. Miss Abernathy was kind enough to accept our invitation to Maddie's birthday celebration, Vince explained, his tone polite but reserved. We thought she might enjoy seeing more of the territory while waiting for your return. How thoughtful, Blackwood replied, though his tone suggested he found it anything but. However, now that I've returned, I believe it's time I escorted my fiancé back to town. We have much to discuss regarding our upcoming nuptials. Mary felt caught between two worlds, the warm, welcoming atmosphere of the Caldwell ranch and the formal, somewhat cold demeanor of her intended husband. But she had come to Colorado to marry Harold Blackwood, and she wouldn't dishonor that commitment. Of course, she said. I should gather my things. As Maddie helped her collect her shawl and reticule, the girl whispered, I'm so glad you came today, Mary. I hope we'll see more of you, even after you're married. I hope so too, Mary replied, though she wondered if Harold Blackwood would approve of her maintaining a friendship with the Caldwells. There seemed to be some tension between the families that she didn't understand. Outside, Blackwood had brought a sleek black buggy with a matched pair of bay horses far more elegant than Vince's practical vehicle. As Vince helped Mary into the buggy, their hands touched briefly. Thank you for today, she said softly. It was wonderful. You're always welcome at the Circle C, Vince replied, his eyes conveying something more than his words. As Harold Blackwood guided the horses away from the ranch, Mary felt a strange sense of loss. The man beside her was her future husband, yet he felt like a stranger compared to Vince Caldwell, whom she'd known for less than a week. I trust you enjoyed your diversion, Blackwood said after they had driven some distance in silence. Everyone was very kind, Mary replied cautiously. The Caldwells have a beautiful ranch. It's adequate, Blackwood allowed, though nowhere near as substantial as the Diamond B. My ranch house has 6 bedrooms and a proper dining room. We entertain the most prominent citizens of the county. It sounds lovely, Mary said, though she couldn't help thinking of the warm, lived-in feel of the Caldwell home compared to the grandeur Blackwood described. I should inform you, Miss Abernathy, that there is some history between my family and the Caldwells. A water rights dispute some years ago. While we maintain civil relations, they are not among our social circle. Mary's heart sank at this confirmation of her fears. I see. I apologize if my presence at their gathering was inappropriate. Blackwood's expression softened slightly. You weren't to know, of course. And I can hardly blame Vincent Caldwell for seeking your company in my absence. You are, if I may say so, even more charming than your letters suggested. The compliment should have pleased her, but something in his assessing gaze made Mary uncomfortable, as if he were evaluating a horse or cattle at auction. Tell me about your business in Denver, she said, changing the subject. For the remainder of the drive, Blackwood spoke of investments and business opportunities, railroad stocks, and cattle contracts. He was clearly intelligent and ambitious, and Mary tried to focus on these admirable qualities rather than the coldness she sensed beneath his polished exterior. At the hotel, Blackwood escorted her to the lobby. I've arranged for us to dine together tomorrow evening, he said. We have much to discuss, including the date for our wedding. I see no reason for extended delay now that you've arrived. So soon? Mary asked, surprised. But we've only just met. We've been corresponding for 6 months, Miss Abernathy. I believe we know each other's minds quite well. He took her hand and pressed his lips to it briefly. Until tomorrow evening, then. After he departed, Mary climbed the stairs to her room, her thoughts in turmoil. Harold Blackwood was exactly as he had described himself in his letters: successful, educated, refined. He offered security and status, everything she had hoped for when she agreed to become a mail-order bride. Yet as she prepared for bed, it was not Blackwood's distinguished features that filled her thoughts, but Vince Caldwell's laughing eyes as he taught her to play horseshoes, his strong hands guiding her through the dance, his simple words, "You're perfect just as you are." The following morning, Mary attended church with Martha Jenkins as planned. Harold Blackwood was there, sitting in a pew near the front with other prominent citizens. He acknowledged her with a nod but made no move to join her. After the service, as people gathered on the church steps to socialize, Mary found herself surrounded by curious women eager to meet Harold Blackwood's mail-order bride. Their questions were mostly kind, if intrusive, but she noticed several glances exchanged when she mentioned she had spent the previous day at the Caldwell ranch. "Harold must have been surprised to find you there," commented one woman with raised eyebrows. "The Caldwells are good people," Martha Jenkins interjected firmly, and they were kind to include Mary in their family celebration. Before anyone could respond, the crowd parted as Harold Blackwood approached. "Miss Abernathy," he said formally, "I would be honored if you would accompany me for a drive this afternoon before our dinner engagement." "I would like that," Mary replied, thinking it would give them a chance to become better acquainted. The afternoon drive took them along a winding road that climbed into the foothills, offering spectacular views of the valley below. Blackwood pointed out landmarks and property boundaries, speaking with pride of the territory he had claimed and developed. "My father came west in '52, he explained. He had the foresight to claim water rights to 3 creeks that feed this valley. Without water, land is worthless in this territory." "Is that what caused the dispute with the Caldwells?" Mary asked, remembering his comment from the previous day. Blackwood's expression hardened. "Thomas Caldwell diverted one of those creeks to water his east pasture during a drought year. He claimed the water rights had never been properly recorded. It was settled in court in my favor, of course, but the Caldwells have harbored resentment ever since." Mary frowned. The story didn't align with what she had observed of the Caldwell family's character, but she had no reason to doubt Blackwood's account. "Your ranch sounds impressive," she said, changing the subject. "When might I see it?" "Soon," Blackwood promised. "Perhaps next weekend. There are some improvements I wish to complete first." They returned to town in time for Mary to freshen up before dinner at the hotel's dining room. Blackwood had reserved a private table in the corner, and he ordered without consulting her, a fact that Mary found slightly presumptuous, but not worth mentioning. As they ate, Blackwood outlined his expectations for their marriage. "I require a wife who can manage the household staff, entertain business associates, and present a respectable appearance in the community," he explained. "Your letters indicated you possess the necessary domestic skills, though we may need to augment your wardrobe." "I'm a skilled seamstress," Mary offered. "I can make whatever is needed." Blackwood nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Economy is a virtue, even for those who can afford better." As the meal progressed, Mary found herself increasingly uncomfortable with Blackwood's precise, almost clinical description of their future life together. He spoke of marriage as a business arrangement, with clearly defined roles and expectations. There was no mention of affection, companionship, or shared dreams. "I thought we might set the wedding date for 3 weeks from now," Blackwood said as they finished dessert. "That should allow sufficient time for preparations while not delaying unnecessarily." 3 weeks. Mary echoed, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. "That seems rather soon." "Is there some reason you wish to wait longer?" Blackwood asked, his tone sharpening slightly. You've come all this way for the express purpose of becoming my wife. I would think you'd be eager to fulfill that commitment." Put that way, Mary could hardly argue. "Of course," she said quietly. 3 weeks will be fine." Satisfied, Blackwood signaled for the bill. "I'll speak to Reverend Jenkins tomorrow about the arrangements." Nothing elaborate, a simple ceremony at the church, followed by a reception at the hotel for the more prominent citizens of the county. As they left the dining room, Mary noticed Vince Caldwell sitting at a table near the door with an older rancher she had met at Maddie's birthday party. Vince nodded politely as they passed, but his eyes held a question that Mary couldn't answer. Outside the hotel, Blackwood took her hands in his. "I believe we shall suit each other admirably, Miss Abernathy. You are exactly the sort of practical, biddable woman I had hoped for." He leaned forward and pressed his lips briefly to hers, a dry, formal kiss that left Mary feeling nothing but a vague sense of disappointment. "Until tomorrow," he said, releasing her hands. In her room that night, Mary sat by the window, her thoughts in turmoil. Harold Blackwood offered everything she had come west for: security, respectability, a comfortable home. Yet something was missing. The warmth, the connection she had felt so immediately with Vince Caldwell, was entirely absent with her intended husband. "It doesn't matter," she told herself firmly. "Marriage isn't about romance. It's about building a life together, about security and mutual respect." But as she prepared for bed, Mary couldn't shake the memory of Vince's words at the general store. "Don't let folks make you think you need to change who you are." Would Harold Blackwood accept her as she was, with her simple ways and practical outlook? Or would he try to mold her into something else entirely, someone more like the Prescott sisters? Perhaps. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Blackwood arranged everything with efficient precision, from the church reservation to the hotel reception. Mary found herself with little to do except sew her wedding dress, a simple affair of cream-colored cotton with lace trim she had found at the general store. She saw little of Vince Caldwell during this time. Once, she spotted him across the street as she was leaving the dressmaker's shop, where she had gone for a fitting of undergarments she couldn't make herself. Their eyes met briefly, and he raised his hand in greeting, but before she could respond, Blackwood appeared at her side, taking her arm possessively. "Caldwell," he acknowledged coldly. "Blackwood," Vince replied with equal coolness. "Miss Abernathy." "Mr." "Caldwell," Mary managed, her heart beating faster at the sight of him. "I understand congratulations are in order," Vince said, his expression unreadable. "The whole town's talking about the wedding." "Thank you," Blackwood replied before Mary could speak. "We're keeping it a modest affair, of course, but befitting our position in the community." Vince's gaze shifted to Mary. "I hope you'll be very happy, Miss Abernathy." "Thank you," she whispered, unable to say more with Blackwood's hand tightening on her arm. With a tip of his hat, Vince continued on his way, and Mary felt as if something precious had slipped through her fingers. "I don't believe the Caldwells will be attending the wedding," Blackwood said as they walked toward the hotel. "Given our history, it would be awkward." Mary wanted to protest, but held her tongue. This was to be her husband's day as much as hers, and if he was uncomfortable with the Caldwells' presence, she would respect his wishes. 5 days before the wedding, Mary received an unexpected visitor at the hotel. Maddie Caldwell, her dark hair escaping from its pins as usual, burst into the lobby just as Mary was returning from the sewing circle. "Mary, I've been hoping to catch you," the girl exclaimed. "I've barely seen you since your intended returned." "Maddie, how lovely to see you," Mary said, genuinely pleased. "Come up to my room for tea." Once they were settled with cups of tea brought by Mrs. Wilson, Maddie launched into animated conversation about ranch happenings and local gossip. But eventually, her expression grew serious. "Mary, are you really going to marry Harold Blackwood?" Startled by the direct question, Mary set down her cup. "Of course, that's why I came to Colorado." Maddie bit her lip. "It's just, he's not what I imagined for you. He's so stiff and proper, and you're so simple." Mary suggested with a wry smile, recalling the Prescott sisters' mockery. No, well, yes, but not in a bad way. You're genuine, real, not putting on airs or trying to be something you're not. Maddie leaned forward earnestly. Blackwood cares about appearances above all else. His first wife? Mary interrupted, shocked. Harold was married before. Maddie's eyes widened. You didn't know. She died about 2 years ago. Pneumonia, they said, though some whispered. She stopped abruptly. Whispered what? Mary pressed. Nothing specific, Maddie backtracked. Just that she wasn't happy. She was from back east too, like you. Very refined, always dressed in the latest fashions. But she seemed sad. Mary's mind raced. Harold had never mentioned a previous marriage in his letters. It wasn't uncommon for widowers to seek new wives, especially in the West where women were scarce, but his omission troubled her. Perhaps he didn't want to burden me with sad memories, she suggested, though the excuse sounded weak even to her own ears. Maddie didn't look convinced. Maybe. But shouldn't your husband share important parts of his past with you? The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. After Maddie left, Mary sat alone in her room, unsettled by this new information. Why had Harold kept his previous marriage a secret? And why had no one else in town mentioned it to her? That evening, when Harold called at the hotel to escort her to dinner, Mary gathered her courage to ask him directly. Harold, is it true you were married before? Blackwood stiffened, his expression darkening. Who told you that? Does it matter? Is it true? After a moment, he sighed. Yes, I was married briefly. Elena died of pneumonia 2 winters ago. I didn't mention it because it seemed irrelevant to our arrangement. Irrelevant, Mary echoed, hurt by his dismissal. Your previous marriage is hardly irrelevant to the woman who's about to become your wife. It was a painful chapter I preferred not to revisit, Blackwood said, his tone softening slightly. Elena was delicate. The frontier life proved too harsh for her constitution. Something in his manner made Mary uneasy, but she reminded herself that grief affected people differently. Perhaps Harold's reticence was simply his way of coping with loss. I understand, she said finally. But in the future, I hope you'll share such important matters with me. Marriage should be built on honesty. Of course, Blackwood agreed, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. Now, shall we proceed to dinner? I've arranged for the dressmaker to visit tomorrow for final adjustments to your wedding clothes. As they walked to the restaurant, Mary felt a growing sense of disquiet. Harold had answered her question, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story of his first marriage than he had revealed. The next morning, Mary was awakened by the sound of commotion in the street below her window. Looking out, she saw several men on horseback thundering into town. One of them slumped forward in the saddle, supported by another rider. With a shock, she recognized Vince Caldwell's distinctive buckskin horse. Dressing hastily, Mary hurried downstairs and out onto the boardwalk. A small crowd had gathered outside the doctor's office across the street. Martha Jenkins stood among them, her face grave. What's happened? Mary asked, hurrying to her side. It's Thomas Caldwell, Martha replied. There was an accident at the ranch. A bull gored him. Vince brought him in, but it looks bad. Mary's heart clenched with worry for the kind man who had welcomed her so warmly to his home. Is there anything I can do? Pray, Martha said simply. And perhaps check on Maddie. She's inside with her father, but she'll need support. For the next hour, Mary waited with the others outside the doctor's office. Eventually, the door opened and the doctor emerged, his expression solemn as he spoke to Vince. Even from across the street, Mary could see Vince's shoulders slump at whatever news the doctor delivered. Without thinking, she crossed the street, drawn by an irresistible need to offer comfort. Vince looked up as she approached, his face etched with grief. Vince, I'm so sorry, she said softly. Is there anything I can do? For a moment, he seemed not to recognize her, his eyes clouded with shock and sorrow. Then he focused on her face. Mary, thank you for coming. How is your father? Vince shook his head. The doctor says he doesn't have long. The injury is too severe. His voice broke on the last word. Mary's heart ached for him. And Maddie? She's with him now. She's trying to be brave, but... He trailed off, unable to continue. Without thinking, Mary reached out and took his hand. "I'll stay with her if you think it would help." Gratitude flooded Vince's exhausted face. "It would. She's grown fond of you." Inside the doctor's small surgery, Mary found Maddie sitting beside a bed where Thomas Caldwell lay, his weathered face pale and still. The girl looked up as Mary entered, her eyes red from crying. "Mary," she whispered, "you came." "Of course I did," Mary replied, moving to stand beside her, a hand on her shoulder. Thomas Caldwell's eyes flickered open at the sound of voices. "Miss Abernathy," he said, his voice barely audible. "Good of you to come." "Save your strength, mister." "Caldwell," Mary urged gently. He shook his head slightly. "Not much strength left to save, I'm afraid." His gaze shifted to his daughter. "Maddie, girl, would you fetch your brother? I need to speak with him." After Maddie reluctantly left the room, Thomas beckoned Mary closer. "You're a good woman, Miss Abernathy. Too good for Blackwood." Startled, Mary didn't know how to respond. "Mr. Caldwell, you shouldn't exert yourself." "No time for niceties," the old rancher rasped. "Need to say my piece while I can. Blackwood isn't what he seems. His first wife." He paused, struggling for breath. "What about her?" Mary asked, her heart racing. Wasn't pneumonia that killed her, was a broken spirit. He crushed it bit by bit. Thomas's eyes bore into hers with surprising intensity. "Don't let him do the same to you." Before Mary could ask more, the door opened, and Vince entered with Maddie. Thomas's attention immediately shifted to his son, and Mary stepped back, her mind reeling from the old man's warning. For the next few hours, Mary stayed at the clinic, offering what comfort she could to Maddie as Vince handled the grim practicalities of his father's impending death. When Thomas Caldwell finally slipped away shortly before sunset, Mary held Maddie as the girl sobbed in her arms. "What will we do without him?" Maddie cried. "He was always so strong, so certain about everything." "You'll carry on," Mary said gently, stroking the girl's hair. "You and Vince together. Your father built something that will last, and he'll live on through both of you." Later, as dusk settled over Timber Creek, Mary sat with Maddie in the hotel dining room, coaxing the exhausted girl to eat something. Vince had gone to make arrangements with the undertaker and to send word to the ranch hands. "You should stay here tonight," Mary told Maddie. "You're too tired to ride back to the ranch." Maddie nodded listlessly. "Vince said the same thing. He's going to stay at the livery with the horses." "The livery? But there's no proper accommodation there." "He doesn't want to leave the horses, and he says he's slept in worse places on cattle drives." Mary frowned, concerned about Vince spending the night in a stable when he was already exhausted and grieving. But before she could suggest an alternative, Harold Blackwood appeared at their table. "Miss Abernathy," he said, his tone cool. "I've been looking for you. We had an appointment with Reverend Jenkins this afternoon to finalize the wedding arrangements." Mary stared at him in disbelief. "Harold, surely you heard about Thomas Caldwell?" "Yes, a tragedy," Blackwood said dismissively. "But our wedding is in 4 days, and there are matters that require attention." Maddie looked up, her tear-stained face hardening at Blackwood's callous manner. "Mary has been kind enough to stay with me after my father's death," she said with surprising steel in her voice. "I'm sure Reverend Jenkins will understand the delay." Blackwood's expression tightened. "Miss Caldwell, while I sympathize with your loss, Miss Abernathy's primary obligation is to me, her future husband." Something in Mary snapped at his words. "No, Harold," she said firmly. "My primary obligation right now is to basic human decency. Maddie has lost her father today. She needs support, not to be abandoned for wedding plans that can wait until tomorrow." Blackwood looked as if she had slapped him. "I see. Perhaps when you've had time to reflect on your priorities, we can continue this conversation." With a stiff bow, he turned and left the dining room. "I'm sorry," Maddie whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble between you and your intended." Mary squeezed the girl's hand. "You didn't. Harold will understand once he's had time to think." But as she arranged for a room for Maddie and helped the exhausted girl prepare for bed, Mary wasn't sure if Blackwood would understand at all. His reaction had revealed a coldness, a lack of empathy that troubled her deeply. Thomas Caldwell's warning echoed in her mind. Blackwood isn't what he seems. Don't let him do the same to you. The following morning, Mary helped Maddie pack her few belongings and walked with her to the livery stable where Vince had spent the night. They found him brushing down his horse, his face haggard from grief and lack of sleep. We'll have the funeral tomorrow, he told them. Simple service at the church, then burial on the ranch. Father would want that. I'll help with whatever needs to be done, Mary offered. Vince gave her a tired smile. That's kind of you, but don't you have wedding preparations to attend to? There was no bitterness in his tone, just a simple acknowledgement of reality, but Mary felt a pang of guilt nonetheless. The wedding can wait, she said firmly. Your father was good to me. I want to pay my respects properly. As they walked out of the livery, leading the horses, Maddie went ahead to check on something at the general store, leaving Mary and Vince alone for a moment. I heard about your disagreement with Blackwood last night, Vince said quietly. Mary sighed. News travels fast in a small town. Timber Creek thrives on gossip, Vince agreed. But for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Maddie needed you. Your father said something to me, Mary said hesitantly, before the end, about Harold's first wife. Vince's expression grew serious. What did he say? That it wasn't pneumonia that killed her, but a broken spirit. That Harold crushed it. Mary looked up at him, searching his face. Is that true? Vince was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Eleanor Blackwood was a lively woman when she first came west. Educated, refined, but full of enthusiasm for frontier life. Within a year, she barely spoke above a whisper. Blackwood criticized everything: her housekeeping, her conversation, her appearance. Nothing was ever good enough. Mary's stomach clenched at his words. And her death. Officially pneumonia, but she'd grown so thin, so fragile by then, some thought she simply lost the will to fight the illness. Vince met her gaze directly. I'm not saying Blackwood physically harmed her. But there are other ways to break a person. The truth of his words resonated deeply with Mary. She thought of Blackwood's critical comments about her clothes, his dismissal of her concerns about his first marriage, his cold reaction to the Caldwell's tragedy. Were these signs of the man he truly was? I don't know what to do, she admitted softly. You don't have to decide anything right now, Vince said gently. Just be sure before you say your vows. Marriage is meant to be a partnership, not a prison. Their conversation was interrupted by Maddie's return, and soon after, they parted ways, the Caldwell siblings to prepare for their father's funeral. Mary to face Harold Blackwood and the consequences of her defiance the previous night. She found him at the bank, where he kept an office for his various business interests. His greeting was cool but polite. I trust Miss Caldwell is feeling better this morning, as well as can be expected after losing her father, Mary replied. The funeral will be tomorrow. Blackwood nodded. A sad business. Now about our wedding, I've rescheduled our meeting with Reverend Jenkins for this afternoon. Mary took a deep breath. Harold, I think we should postpone the wedding. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. Postpone? For what reason? Out of respect for the Caldwell's loss. It seems inappropriate to celebrate so soon after a funeral. The Caldwells won't be attending our wedding, Blackwood pointed out. Their grief, while unfortunate, has no bearing on our plans. It has bearing on me, Mary insisted. I've come to consider Maddie a friend. I can't in good conscience celebrate while she's in mourning. Blackwood studied her for a long moment. Very well. 1 week's delay, that's the most I'm willing to concede. It wasn't the response Mary had hoped for, but it would give her time to sort through her conflicted feelings. Thank you for understanding. I understand more than you think, Mary, Blackwood said, his tone softening slightly. I understand that you have a kind heart, and that's one of the qualities that attracted me to you, but I also understand that emotional attachments can cloud judgment. The Caldwells have always been persuasive. There was something in his tone that made Mary uncomfortable, a suggestion that she was being manipulated rather than acting on her own convictions. But before she could formulate a response, Blackwood continued. Now, I have an appointment with a cattle buyer. We'll speak again at dinner. Thomas Caldwell's funeral the following day was a simple affair, but well attended. It seemed that despite his gruff manner, the old rancher had been widely respected in the community. Mary sat with Mattie in the front pew of the small church, offering silent support as Reverend Jenkins spoke of Thomas's contributions to Timber Creek and his unwavering integrity. Harold Blackwood did not attend, a fact noted by several townspeople with raised eyebrows and whispered comments. His absence, while not surprising given the history between the families, nonetheless highlighted the choice Mary had made in being there. After the service, a procession of wagons and riders followed the simple pine coffin to the Caldwell Ranch, where Thomas was laid to rest on a hillside overlooking the property he had built from nothing. As the last prayers were said and people began to disperse, Mary found herself standing beside Vince at the fresh grave. "He would have appreciated you being here," Vince said quietly. "Father always said you could judge a person's character by how they treated others in times of trouble." "He was a good man," Mary replied. "I wish I'd had the chance to know him better." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, then Vince said, "Mattie and I would be honored if you'd join us for supper before heading back to town. Nothing fancy, just some of the food the neighbors brought." Mary hesitated, thinking of Harold's likely disapproval, then decided she didn't care. "I'd like that," she said. "Thank you." The meal was indeed simple cold ham, bread, preserves, and pie, but the atmosphere in the Caldwell kitchen was warm despite the sorrow that hung over the household. Ranch hands and neighbors shared stories of Thomas, some funny, some poignant, all painting a picture of a man who had lived fully and on his own terms. As the gathering began to break up, Vince offered to drive Mary back to town. "It'll be dark soon," he said. "I don't want you riding alone." In the buggy, with the setting sun painting the landscape in golds and purples, Mary found herself opening up to Vince about her uncertainties. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, marrying Harold," she admitted. "When I answered his advertisement, it seemed like the perfect solution, a chance for security, for a home of my own. But now you're not so sure," Vince finished for her. Mary nodded. "I made a commitment. I traveled all this way. Harold paid for my passage. I feel obligated." "Obligation isn't the same as love," Vince said gently, "and it's a poor foundation for marriage." "I never expected love," Mary confessed. "I thought respect and shared purpose would be enough." Vince was quiet for a moment, then said, "You deserve more than enough, Mary. You deserve someone who sees your worth, who values your kindness and your strength. Someone who wouldn't try to change you into something you're not." His words stirred something deep in Mary's heart, a longing she had tried to suppress since arriving in Timber Creek. "What if that person isn't Harold?" she whispered. Vince's hands tightened on the reins. "Then you have a difficult choice to make." They drove the rest of the way in silence, each lost in thoughts too complex to voice. As they reached the outskirts of town, Vince suddenly pulled the buggy to a halt. "Mary," he said, turning to face her, "I've got no right to say this, but I can't stay silent any longer. You're the most genuine, kind-hearted woman I've ever met. From the moment I saw you in that dining room, trying to hold your head high while the Prescott sisters mocked you, I knew you were special." Mary's heart raced at his words. "Vince, let me finish," he said urgently. "I've got no fancy house to offer you, no fine clothes or social standing. The Circle C is a working ranch, and with Father gone, it'll be a struggle to keep it going. But if you were there beside me, I'd spend every day making sure you knew how much I valued you exactly as you are." "What are you saying?" Mary whispered, though she knew the answer. "I'm saying you're my dream, Mary Abernathy, the woman I never thought I'd find, and I'm asking you not to marry Harold Blackwood." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then Mary reached out and touched Vince's weathered cheek. "I've been such a fool," she said softly. "I came all this way looking for security, when what I really needed was to be seen, truly seen for who I am." Vince covered her hand with his own. "Is that a yes?" "It's a I need to do things properly," Mary replied. "I made a commitment to Harold, and I won't simply run away from it. I need to speak with him to explain." Vince nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's fair, and it's one of the things I admire about you, your sense of honor." He drove her the rest of the way to the hotel, where they said goodbye with no more than a clasp of hands, though their eyes spoke volumes. Mary watched him drive away, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks, despite the difficult conversation that lay ahead. The next morning, Mary sent a note to Harold Blackwood, asking him to meet her at the hotel's small garden where they could speak privately. He arrived promptly at the appointed time, his expression concerned. "You seem troubled, Mary," he said as they sat on a bench beneath a flowering bush. "Is something wrong?" Mary took a deep breath. "Harold, I've been doing a great deal of thinking since Thomas Caldwell's death, about life, about what's important, about marriage. And," he prompted when she hesitated. "I can't marry you," she said simply. "It wouldn't be fair to either of us." Blackwood's face hardened. "This is about Vincent Caldwell, isn't it?" "It's about me," Mary corrected gently. "About recognizing that I was marrying you for the wrong reasons, for security, for status, out of obligation, not for love or even deep respect. Love is a luxury, Mary. A practical arrangement between compatible people is far more likely to endure. Perhaps for some, but I've realized I want more than practicality. I want a partnership based on mutual affection and respect." Blackwood's expression turned cold. "And you think you'll find that with Caldwell?" A rough cowboy with dirt under his fingernails, and barely 2 coins to rub together now that his father's gone. "Vince may not have your wealth or refinement, Harold, but he has something more valuable, a generous heart, and the ability to see beyond surface appearances." "How poetic," Blackwood said sarcastically. "I wonder if you'll find poetry quite so satisfying when you're living in a crude ranch house, working your fingers to the bone from dawn till dusk." Mary smiled, unperturbed by his attempt to frighten her. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Harold. I never have been, and I'd rather live simply with someone who values me for who I am than in luxury with someone who sees me as an accessory to be improved upon." Blackwood stood abruptly. "You'll regret this decision, Mary. When the initial infatuation fades, you'll realize what you've thrown away." "Perhaps," Mary acknowledged, "but it's my decision to make and my regret to bear if I'm wrong." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the small sapphire ring he had given her as a token of their engagement. "I believe this belongs to you." Blackwood took the ring, his face a mask of controlled anger. "I paid for your passage west. I expect that debt to be repaid." "It will be," Mary assured him. "I'll work as a seamstress until every penny is returned to you." With a curt nod, Blackwood turned and strode away, his rigid posture betraying his fury. Mary remained on the bench, a curious mixture of relief and trepidation washing over her. She had ended her engagement and forsaken the security she had traveled thousands of miles to obtain. Yet she felt lighter, more authentically herself than she had in years. That afternoon, as Mary was arranging her belongings in her hotel room, wondering what her next step should be, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Maddie Caldwell, her eyes bright with excitement. "Is it true?" the girl demanded without preamble. "Vince said you broke your engagement to Blackwood." Mary laughed despite herself. "News does travel fast in this town. Yes, it's true." Maddie squealed and threw her arms around Mary. "I knew you were too smart to marry that cold fish, but what will you do now?" "Will you go back east?" "I don't know," Mary admitted. "I need to find work to repay Harold for my passage. After that," she shrugged, "I haven't thought that far ahead." "You could come stay with us at the ranch," Maddie suggested eagerly. "We have plenty of room, and with father gone, we could use the help. Vince is hopeless at keeping house, and I'm not much better." Mary was touched by the offer, but hesitated. That's very kind, Maddie, but I wouldn't want to impose. And there would be talk if I moved to the ranch so soon after breaking my engagement. Maddie waved dismissively. People will talk no matter what you do. Better to give them something worth gossiping about. Her expression grew more serious. Besides, Vince is miserable without you. He tries to hide it, but I can tell. He thinks you'll go back east now that you're not marrying Blackwood. I have no desire to return to Boston, Mary said truthfully. There's nothing for me there. Then say you'll come, Maddie pleaded. At least to visit. Vince is too proud to ask you himself, but I have no such qualms. Mary couldn't help but laugh at the girl's persistence. All right, I'll visit, but I still need to find work in town to repay my debt to Harold. Mrs. Wilson mentioned just yesterday that she needs someone to help with sewing linens for the hotel, Maddie said triumphantly. You could work for her during the day and ride out to the ranch in the evenings. I'll come fetch you myself. And so began a new chapter in Mary's life. Mrs. Wilson was delighted to hire her as a seamstress, and Mary quickly proved her worth. Not only repairing linens, but also creating new curtains and bedspreads that added a touch of elegance to the modest hotel. In the evenings, Maddie would arrive with an extra horse, and the two would ride to the Circle C ranch, where Vince would be waiting, his face lighting up at the sight of Mary. They would share supper together, talking of the day's events, and sometimes afterwards, Vince and Mary would walk along the creek that bordered the property, getting to know each other more deeply with each passing day. I want to court you properly, Vince told her during one such walk, a week after she had broken her engagement. No rushing, no pressure. I want you to be absolutely certain this time. Mary's heart swelled at his consideration. I appreciate that, she said, taking his hand. But I already know what I want, Vince. I've never been more certain of anything. Their first kiss, shared in the golden light of sunset beside the creek, was everything Mary had never dared to dream of, tender yet passionate, a promise of the love that had bloomed between them against all odds. As autumn turned to winter, Mary divided her time between her work in town and her evenings at the ranch. The Prescott sisters and their circle continued to snub her, especially after Harold Blackwood left town for an extended business trip to Denver, but Mary found she cared little for their opinion. She had found true friends among the sewing circle ladies and the neighboring ranchers who had always respected the Caldwells. By Christmas, Mary had repaid her debt to Harold Blackwood through her work at the hotel and additional sewing she did for townspeople. With that obligation fulfilled, she felt free to accept Vince's proposal when he offered it, along with a simple silver ring that had belonged to his mother. It's not fancy, he apologized as he slipped it onto her finger. It's perfect, Mary assured him, her eyes shining with happy tears. Because it comes with your heart. They were married on New Year's Day, 1876, in the same small church where they had mourned Thomas Caldwell months earlier. The building was packed with well-wishers, ranch hands, neighbors, the sewing circle ladies, and even Mrs. Wilson, who had become something of a mentor to Mary. Maddie, radiant in a blue dress Mary had made for her, stood as maid of honor, while Reverend Jenkins beamed as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Vince kissed his bride, a cheer went up that nearly raised the roof. The celebration afterward at the Circle C ranch lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the county. As Vince twirled Mary around the barn that had been cleared and decorated for dancing, he pulled her close and whispered, "Happy, Mrs. Caldwell." "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. Later, as they stood on the porch of the ranch house, their house now looking out at the star-filled sky, Vince put his arm around Mary's shoulders. "Not quite what you expected when you answered that advertisement, is it?" he asked with a smile. Mary leaned into his embrace. "No, it's infinitely better. I came west looking for security, but I found something far more precious, a place where I'm valued for exactly who I am." "And who you are, Mary Caldwell, is everything I ever dreamed of," Vince said, his voice husky with emotion. "Your kindness, your strength, your simple wisdom, they're worth more than all the fancy trappings in the world." As they stood together on the threshold of their new life, Mary thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a lonely seamstress in Boston to a mail-order bride mocked for her simplicity, to a woman who had found the courage to follow her heart. It hadn't been an easy path, but standing beside the man who saw her true worth, Mary knew she had finally found her way home. In the years that followed, the Circle C Ranch prospered under Vince and Mary's care. They worked side by side through good seasons and bad, through blizzards and droughts, always finding strength in each other when challenges arose. Maddie eventually married a young rancher from a neighboring property, giving Vince and Mary a nephew they adored like their own child. And when, in the spring of 1877, Mary gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after Vince's father, their joy was complete. As she watched Vince gently cradling their newborn, Mary thought of how far she had come from that uncertain day when she had stepped off the stagecoach in Timber Creek. "What are you thinking about?" Vince asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how sometimes the journey we begin isn't the one we're meant to complete," Mary replied, reaching out to touch his face. "And how grateful I am that I found the courage to change course." Vince leaned down to kiss her, their sleeping son nestled between them. "I thank God every day that you did," he whispered. "My simple, extraordinary, perfect dream come true."